the Midsummer edition of Coyotes Corner alongside Dave Vest. I'm Luke Lapinski here in the early weeks of August, kind of the furthest possible point from hockey, but not that far, as it turns out.
Correct.
You're
well
already
said.
making faces. Thanks.
Well, it seemed like you were struggling there a little bit.
Please. It's not my first podcast, Dave.
It's early August.
It is.
The light can be seen now, at least in my world, the hockey light at the end of the off-season tunnel.
But not outside because it's a monsoon right now.
Correct. And a haboob, if I'm not mistaken.
It's everything rolled into one. It's a monsoon.
You were lucky to get here, I heard.
Yeah, it only took me an hour and a half, so that was nice. But we are now recording this in your office. And I tell you what, Dave, there's nobody else I drive an hour and a half across the Valley area to talk hockey with more than you.
I'm flattered, and this is also one of those days where I enjoy not having any windows in my office.
Well, it's actually nice outside if you're inside, but yeah, anyway. So it is early August. We've still got Coyotes news. You and I have done how many of these shows now just this summer where we've had fairly significant news, like we're not even really stretching for stuff, and now here we are, it's August. Training camp opens in 4 or 5 weeks, if I'm doing the math right.
Mid-September, the exact dates to be announced, but...
yeah, it's thrown off a little bit because of the World Cup of Hockey this year.
Correct. A little bit of a delay. Not much, a little bit.
But we have hit that part of the year where there's football going on right across the street, and once football starts, that means you're weeks away from hockey, and then it's June, basically.
I like to gauge it by the baseball. Baseball playoffs are starting to take shape, at least in my head. The teams that are in it, the teams that are out of it.
Do they take shape in your head before or after the rest of the country?
I don't know. That's a good point. But it's all starting to come together in my head. Baseball playoffs, as you said, the Cardinals, they're practicing. We have to dodge that traffic now, which is great. But back to hockey. We have a whole list.
You're literally dancing right now.
I'm dancing. I'm sitting down and I'm dancing.
Yeah, I can. Your eyes are dancing. Well, the whole point of all that, I think, was that here we are at this point of the year. You would think now there'd be a little bit of a break in terms of news, and there really hasn't been. There's been fairly significant Coyotes news since the last time we did this particular show. I think 2 items jump out to me more than anything. Let's start with Luke Schenn, who I believe the Coyotes had not quite signed yet before the last time we did the show.
That's correct, and he is now one of up to 10 defensemen, as we were looking at the preseason roster here, 10 defensemen on the list of who's going to play defense for this team. It's a great situation for the Coyotes to be in. It's something that they made a priority to address in the offseason, and General Manager John Chaika and Dave Tippett, they've gone at it and have really put together an interesting group of players here. Luke Schenn, let's talk about Luke specifically. Your thoughts when you heard the news that he was officially here?
I don't know what the other publication was that I was doing, but we were talking about a week earlier about defensemen that are still on the market, and it wasn't even in terms of the Coyotes. We were just looking at other teams around the NHL, and I've already started my research for the upcoming season on the other teams around the NHL, and you start to look, and there's some quality teams that just have no defense. And when I say no defense, I mean like they literally don't have enough players right now on their NHL roster. They don't have enough NHL defensemen to fill out a blue line. And so we were looking at what players are available that either are established or have enough upside that they'd be worth taking a run at for any team. And Luke Schenn, to me, was at the very top of the list. I think I even have this on tape somewhere, me saying Luke Schenn's at the top of the list, because you're talking about a guy that was a former top 5 pick in the draft not that long ago. He's still just 26 years old. He was in that draft when Drew Doughty and Alex Pietrangelo came out, Zach Bogosian. They were like the 4 defensemen at the very top of that draft. And so he goes to Toronto. They because they use such a high pick, they need him to be a top pairing defenseman. And so you get the pressures of that on top of the pressures of playing in that market. And I'm sure I haven't talked to Luke yet, and that'll be awkward when I do because we're both named Luke. I'm sure that he's kind of looking for a fresh start. But the Coyotes didn't spend a top 5 pick on him, and they don't need him to be a top pairing defenseman. They can just cash in on the upside for cheap.
Luke Schenn is a player that the Coyotes wanted to draft, I've been told, in 2008. As you mentioned, he was the 5th overall pick. The Coyotes had the 8th pick. And if Luke Schenn was available at number 8, they would have drafted him, I've been told. He was not. The Coyotes drafted Mikhail Boedker. But they've wanted him for years.
Yeah.
As you said, he's only 26 years old. You forget about that because he's been in the league for so long. He played his first game. He was 18 years old.
Which is almost unheard of for a defenseman. Really, defensemen almost always take at least a year or two before they break in.
And I did have the opportunity to speak to Luke. I mistakenly called him Luke Lapinski right off the top. So
He needs to get used to that now.
I got that right out of the way.
Okay.
But no, talking to Luke, he said things to myself and the other reporters along the lines of, yeah, I've been in this league a long time, but I still have room to grow and get better. And he wanted to come here because he thought this was the best place for him to come to get better and to evolve. 26 years old. Again, we've said it 3 times. He's played so many games. I believe it's over 500 games. But to hear him say things like, yeah, I'm ready to take it to the next step. I have lots of upside left. That got, I know it got John Chaika very excited, and it should get all the fans excited.
Yeah, I mean, it's 2 tough markets where he played, Toronto and Philadelphia. And I think even when he was in Philadelphia, he still had the expectations of being a top 5 pick. I think here the biggest thing is that he is still relatively young for a defenseman. I mean, there's been plenty of defensemen, you just look over the last 10, 15 years, that really didn't even make their mark until their mid to late 20s, because that is a position that you start later. It maybe not quite as late as goalies, but definitely later than forwards. I mean, if you're a forward and you haven't done anything by 27, 28 years old, people are kind of like, that's what you are. But in terms of defense, you can certainly evolve your game. This is a great scenario to evolve your game as a defenseman in your mid-20s, because you're around a lot of other young defensemen, and the style that he plays, I mean, he's got that size. He can be physical. He can be a really solid stay-at-home defenseman. A lot of times, it's just who you pair those guys with. If you pair a stay-at-home defenseman with another young stay-at-home defenseman, well, then that's just what you're going to get. But the Coyotes have puck movers that they can put with him, and all of a sudden he makes that player better, and that player makes Luke Schenn's value go up as well. So it's, I don't want to get too carried away, but that was when I saw that he signed, and I didn't see what team it was quite yet, and I guess I kind of knew because I was getting texts from people. But just the fact that he had signed, I was like, I like that move for the majority of teams in this league. And then when I saw it was the Coyotes, I was like, okay, I'm pretty much on board with this.
A couple of stats to throw at you, Luke, about Luke Schenn. He ranked 15th in the NHL last season. He had 234 hits in 72 games. You do the math, that's 3.3 hits per game. It's also 56 more hits than Klaus Dahlbeck had for the Coyotes last season, and I bring him up because he led the team in hits.
Yeah.
So, he's a very physical player, something the Coyotes identified as a need in the offseason. One more stat. Since entering the league in 2008-2009, Luke Schenn has totaled 1,775 hits. He's second only to Brooks Orpik during that time span in hits.
That's, I mean, you just got more physical. Your blue line became more physical. And, a lot of times when you're talking about the defense, it always goes back to Oliver Ekman-Larsson, because his simple ability to do almost everything back there allows you to just kind of pick and choose how you want to fill different areas of your defense. And Oliver, he can hit, but that's not necessarily what you want him doing. You want him triggering the offense or providing offense or making plays defensively as more of a finesse player back there, and he does it very well. So you have the luxury of being able to just go out and find a defenseman who can just hit. And Luke Schenn, I think, can do more than just hit, but as you just detailed, he's very good at that. And so all of a sudden, I don't know that you would ever see Dahlbeck and Schenn out there together, but you may see one out there on the second pairing and one out there on the third pairing at some point this season, and then you've got just waves of physicality coming at the other team. By the way, that should have been the name of our podcast.
Waves of physicality?
Waves of physicality. We should have a different name every week.
I love that.
Okay.
Although I don't think physicality is actually a word. It's one of those sports words that has been made a word.
This is one of those sports podcasts.
I defy you to look up the word physicality in the dictionary.
I don't have access to the internet.
Do they still make dictionaries?
Do they still make the internet? No, I glazed right over that because I don't even know what a dictionary is. It's like a phone book, isn't it?
Connor Murphy.
Well, Connor Murphy, he gets a 6-year deal, so you've got him locked in now for a long time. Very, very clearly has taken, I think, pretty big steps each of the last 2 years, really ever since he's gotten here. From talking to him, just the way he approaches the game, he's very studious when it comes to hockey. He takes it very seriously. Not to say every NHLer doesn't take it seriously, but he is passionate about improving. And so you've got him locked in. I think a very good deal for the team, quite frankly, especially when you see what some other defensemen around the league are signing for that I don't think are anywhere near as good as Connor Murphy. It's nice to have him there because he's going to continue to evolve. He's even younger than Luke Schenn.
23 years old, 6-year contract. I have to admit, when I first heard the news of that, I was a little surprised. You really don't see that around here very often. I know Mike Smith got a long deal, and so did Oliver Ekman-Larsson. But I never thought that Connor Murphy would be given that long of a contract. And yet, when you speak to John Chaika about it became crystal clear why they did it. They wanted to make an investment in him. They see him as a long-term piece of this organization. They also see him as a potential leader for this organization. Shane Doan's not going to play forever. We know that, although,
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe he is.
I wouldn't count him out.
All right, I'll temper that a little bit. But once he is gone, the Coyotes are going to need to turn to some of these guys to take over some of the leadership. And clearly, I mean, if it was any question before, there shouldn't be now. Connor Murphy is one of the guys that you're going to see as a leader for this team. I'm not saying he's going to be the captain, but he's going to be looked upon to play a serious leadership role.
Yeah, two things you said in there jump out to me. One, the leadership thing, for sure. If you start to look at the Coyotes and just who they have signed beyond this upcoming season or even beyond next year, there's not a lot of, and this can change obviously, but there's not a lot of established vets signed on this team. Not a lot of, I shouldn't say that, there's not a lot of players in their mid to late 30s signed on this team. And so you have to start looking around at some of these young guys who are going to be the leaders going forward. And obviously, Oliver Ekman-Larsson fits that bill pretty well. A guy like Max Domi has already shown amazing leadership qualities, still 20. But Connor Murphy is another one of those guys. And so, you have to, you can't just have talent. You also have to have leadership. And I think the Coyotes have done a good job, not just of identifying what they have in the room right now, but of drafting players like that. And there's other guys. I mean, there's good leadership in that room. It helps that they've been learning from a guy like Shane Doan all these years. And so it's funny, you say that you were surprised or you're a little surprised when you first heard the news that the Coyotes would sign him to a 6-year deal. I was almost the other way. I was surprised that a young defenseman in this league would commit to one team for 6 years as opposed to just saying, I'll take 2 years and then I'll hit the open market and maybe I'll re-sign with you guys, but I'm going to make a ton of money. Again, the market on defensemen, I think I say this every podcast, if you are a parent who wants your kid to play hockey and go deep, have them play defense, especially if they're right-handed. And Connor Murphy does a lot of things well back there. I'm excited about that move. It really solidifies this blue line. Now, you look, we're going to sit here and list off 10 defensemen they have, but Oliver Ekman-Larsson, Alex Goligoski, Connor Murphy at the very top of that, that's a real nice core.
Connor Murphy's coming off a career-high season last year in many categories. Goals, he had 6, 11 assists, 17 points. He was second on the team with 175 hits and second on the team with 139 blocked shots. A stat that I love to talk about with Connor Murphy is he was a +5 last season, which by contrast is 32 better than what he was the year before, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
He was -27,
yes,
essentially. And then
you're showing off that you can do math again.
+5. If you can
once every
sense,
show.
I'm really struggling to make sure I did that right.
I can sense, but that's because I can see the expression on your face right now. You rattle off the hits there with Murphy, too. He's another player that Murphy does a little bit of everything. He can provide you with the offense, but he can also be physical, and he's a very smart player out there. But now you start to look at how this defense is taking shape, and if there is a game where you're playing Murphy and you're playing Schenn and you're playing Dahlbeck, that's a pretty physical defense. And then the best part about it is you can counter that with OEL and Goligoski moving the puck around the ice. It's sometimes you fall into that trap when you're talking about the local team, because this is the team you and I see up close, and most of the people listening to this podcast see the Coyotes up close. And they're like, oh, we're excited about these players. Look at some of the other defenses around the NHL. Most teams don't have a defense like this. They really don't. Most teams don't have defensive depth. They don't have the versatility that the Coyotes have. Yes, most teams don't have Oliver Ekman-Larsson, and that's why you drafted him as early as you did. But most teams don't have those other pieces around them, to the point where I would venture to say most teams are probably looking at the Coyotes saying, hey, why don't you give us a couple of those players, even if they're the bottom of the depth chart. But, yeah, basically 10 defensemen entering training camp with legitimate shots to make this team.
Let's continue the defenseman theme here.
Okay.
Looking at the list, Michael Stone, he's in the news. He signed a 1-year deal, and we know why. Connor Murphy signs 6 years. Michael Stone signs 1 year. It was announced on the same day.
Yeah.
And I would imagine some fans are like, what the heck's going on here? But go ahead and explain it for everybody.
Well, for both sides, I think it makes the most sense here because Michael Stone is still coming back from that really pretty rough injury he suffered against the Flyers, I believe, last year, right near the end of the season.
Correct.
And so, for him, he gets a year to – he's obviously a big part of this team. 37 points, I believe, last year. Was one of the breakout players in the NHL. We'll get to that list in just a second. But, it gives him a season to recover fully, get back out there on the ice, and start playing games and be a part of this team. We don't know if that's going to be 3 weeks into the season or 6 weeks or whatever. We don't know yet. But either way, it gives him a year to prove himself for his next contract. It also gives the Coyotes a year where they get Michael Stone back, who's obviously a big part of this blue line, but they get to see, what level he can get back to too. So both sides were kind of in a spot where let's see what happens this year, and so it makes sense.
Michael Stone had 36 points.
Oh.
You were very close.
I gave him an extra point.
30 assists
for effort. That's the thing. I mean, people don't necessarily think of Stone as, there's an offensive defenseman. 30 assists is a lot. 30 assists is a lot more than some forwards have around this league.
So Michael Stone gets the 1 year deal. We've been talking this whole podcast about defensemen and having so many. And then you throw in a guy like Jacob Chikrin, who we got to see, not only at the draft when he was drafted 16th overall by the Coyotes, but then at the development camp. And quite frankly, he was one of the players that stood out the most. And not too long ago, he signs his contract with the Coyotes. So just add Jacob Chikrin to this pool of talented defensemen the Coyotes have waiting for training camp.
Yeah, it's very clear that the Coyotes, and they said this, they were very clear about it at the end of last season, we want to strengthen that defense. We want to get more depth, and they've absolutely done that because Chikrin's not even one of the 10 we're talking about as guys coming in that would be in the top 10 spots to have a shot at making this team this year. Simply because it usually, like we said earlier, it usually takes a year or two for a defenseman to make it. I wouldn't count him out. He has the attitude that he wants to make this team.
I wouldn't count him out. And, based on what we saw here, he was taking that development camp very seriously as a way to say, hey, look at me now. Don't write me off as not being here next year. I want to be considered right away. And I thought it was really funny. We had a chance to interview Shane Doan after his contract was announced. And I don't know how many people picked up on this, but among Shane's comments, he got into a long conversation about the future of this team, and he happened to mention how he was watching the development camp scrimmage while he was on vacation.
Yeah, so I heard that quote
on the ArizonaCoyotes.com live stream.
Yes.
And he just raved about Jacob Chikrin, which I thought was terrific. If Jacob Chikrin was listening to that, I'm sure it made him feel terrific and gave him even more confidence from what he's trying to accomplish. But Shane Doan, very impressed by Chikrin. My whole point of bringing that up is don't assume that we won't be seeing Jacob Chikrin for a while. We very well may see him sooner than you think.
And if he can push his way in this year, that's extremely impressive. Even if he pushes his way in next year, you start to look, you've got your 10 defensemen. Some of them aren't signed beyond this year, so there's room for the next wave. Jacob Chikrin is, to me, the headliner of that next wave. And Shane Doan obviously knows a thing or two about hockey. So if he's speaking highly of you or singing your praises as a hockey player, he knows what he's talking about. If he didn't see anything he liked about Chikrin, he just wouldn't have said anything. He obviously is not going to come out and be like, "Oh, that guy, he's overrated." But for him to single him out, that really says something. And I think the Coyotes, what they've done best this offseason is they had that prospect pool that we started to see the fruits of all those drafts come together last year with Domi and Duclair coming in. One of the best prospect pools in hockey, top 1, 2, or 3, depending who you talk about. It was mostly forwards, though, coming into this draft. So they knew, let's address the defense through free agency or trades or whatever at the NHL level, and then let's just draft a ton of defensive pieces. And so now, all of a sudden, how different does this defense look now than it did 4 months ago? 2 months ago, really. It's crazy.
Let's spend a quick minute talking about Antoine Vermette.
Okay.
Obviously, Antoine was a fan favorite here for quite a while. He left the Coyotes. He was traded to Chicago, and he came back.
Yeah.
But recently, the Coyotes decided that Antoine did not fit in their immediate plans for the future. So his contract, the second year of his 2-year contract, was bought out, and Antoine was released. I thought John Chaika's comments were very forthcoming. He flat out said on the radio that it was the hardest day that he had to be part of since taking over this job because, it's a business, but these are people that obviously mean a lot to each other and to the community. And John recognized that Antoine was a huge part of the Coyotes, and to make this decision to move on without him, it was tough for John, and he admitted it.
It says something about Antoine. It also says something about John that, Vermette, like you said, has been a big part of this organization for years and years. He was a big part of this organization before Chaika was even here. So for him to have that impact on him in just 2 years, essentially, it says something about both of them. I thought he was spot on when he said, and when he described him as a class act. I don't think there's a better way you can describe Antoine Vermette. And one of my favorite players, not only to watch, but also to interview, just to talk to after games, like very passionate about the game. Obviously a very good player, too. It's not like he was just a good guy that hung out. He contributed a lot for the Coyotes all the way back to when they went to the Western Conference Finals. As you mentioned, he ends up getting traded to Chicago now 2 seasons ago, and I know that was tough for him, and he wins a cup, and he was a big reason why Chicago won the cup. It's tough. That's it's the business side of things, like you said, and like John Chaika said in his interview on the radio, that it's kind of the way it is. I mean, everybody involved in this business knows that it's a very competitive business, and that's just part of it. That's why you got into it on some level. And so I think in a lot of ways it speaks, to me at least, it speaks more to what the Coyotes have on the way and the fact that they need to clear some room.
Okay, so let's talk about some of those players. Okay. Dylan Strome, that's a secret to no one. He was the 3rd overall pick at last year's draft. So we're expecting big things from Dylan Strome this year. I know I am. He almost made the team last year. Probably could have made the team.
Yeah.
He didn't, and was well served not. But I know he's ready to go.
Yeah, I mean, Strome was the number 3 pick in one of the most top-heavy drafts that I can remember, really, in my lifetime, when you consider McDavid and Eichel at the very top 2 spots. I mean, in just a normal, typical draft, Strome's probably the number 1 overall pick. And so he was impressive last year. I have long maintained that he is more impressive in actual game situations than if you're just watching him run drills, because he has those sort of intangibles that you can't really teach. He just knows where to be on the ice. That's instinct to him. He's not going to go out there and outskate, whoever, Clayton Keller, or whoever you want to consider one of the fastest players out there. Coyotes have a lot of speed. Now, kind of getting back into hockey mode, they have a lot of speed. But he's going to get from point A to point B faster than most guys because he's just savvy about it, and he knows how to impact the game. And so the fact that he's already stood out to this coaching staff that much, where he's in a pretty good spot to make this team this year without even really playing a whole lot of games, says something.
Other guys who I'm sure were paying close attention to the Vermette move were Christian Dvorak. I'm going to even throw Laurent Dauphin in there as I stumble over his name. My apologies. I think I did it right, but it took a little while.
The thing is, you have to say it with confidence. A lot of people say it right, but they don't say it with confidence.
All right. Well, I'll have to practice that one.
That's okay. I had to the first question that John McCain asked me when I interviewed him this year was how to pronounce Dauphin's name. And I was like, oh, great. Nice, easy one.
So those 2 guys, for sure, yes, they'll be on the radar in training camp. Who knows if one or both or which one of them will make it. But my point is there's certainly opportunity now.
Yeah, I mean, you've got those 3 players, Strome, Dvorak, and Dauphin. I think at this point it's pretty safe to say at the very least one of them makes it. Pretty good chance 2 of them make it. I guess it's not inconceivable that we even see 3 of them play this season. You got to remember, with a guy like Dvorak, they can send him to Tucson, call him back up, send him. We could see, even if Dvorak doesn't make the team out of camp, he's 100 miles away. So
right. Dauphin too.
Yes, exactly.
Dylan Strome, no, he cannot.
Yeah, Strome, it's kind of you're in or you're out for the whole season with him. And if he doesn't make the team, he's probably going to be playing for Canada at the World Juniors. We saw how that worked out for Max Domi a couple of years ago, and he seems to have the right attitude about that. But also he wants to be here. And I think with a move like this, it's pretty clear the team wants him to be here as well. I'll tell you what, another guy who I don't expect to make the team this year necessarily, but I do think we're going to see him at some point, whether it's later this season or next season, is Ryan McInnes. And, I mean, this opens up a spot for a guy like him to maybe jump in at some point if there's an injury. It's just everybody kind of moves up the ladder. And he's been, like Dvorak, you're talking 2 guys that, since they drafted him, have improved so much. So there's a lot of depth there ultimately. With Vermette only signed 1 more year anyway, that's kind of how that all played out.
Okay, so time is running out quickly here, Luke. I know you're a very busy man. You have places to go and other people to interview. So a couple things we should really touch on real quick. Jim Playfair and Steve Peters, two of the key cogs on Dave Tippett's coaching staff, they re-signed extended contracts today.
Yeah.
So they'll be here for multi-years.
I feel like every time you and I say we're going to do a podcast, somebody gets a contract. So it's so if we schedule our next podcast, rest assured somebody's going to get signed. I think, especially for a young team, it's very important to have that consistency amongst the coaches. I don't think you can even put a value on that. I won't use any other teams around the league as an example, but even in other sports, there's other teams around the league I could use as an example, but I won't. But just you need to have consistency, especially with the head coach, but then also with these other guys. It's not like the players never see Jim Playfair. Steve Peters has a huge role in this team. So you want that consistency because you're going to have some inconsistencies just from having a bunch of players in their early 20s.
Okay, and you mentioned it earlier, but I think it's worth revisiting. NHL.com put out its list of 50 breakout players from last season, and the Coyotes had 3 players on that list: Max Domi, Michael Stone, Anthony Duclair.
Yeah, simple math. What is there? There's 30 NHL teams, so you figure every team's going to have a player and a half on that list. The Coyotes have 3, and I think the best thing with the Coyotes is they've got a bunch more on the way. I'm assuming when they do that list again next year, there's going to be probably at least 3. Actually, I think even guys like those 3 players could still be on the list next year if they take the next step, and that's not inconceivable, especially with Domi and Duclair. And Stone, it's good to see Stone get recognized because he's a defenseman, and a lot of times people just look at the numbers if it's a team they don't see very often. So if they're making that list in Toronto or New York or wherever, if that's how they're compiling the list, I don't know how many New York fans are getting to watch the Coyotes closely night in and night out. They may see Domi on the highlight reels or they'll see Duclair on the highlight reels. But if you look closer on those highlight reels, a lot of those plays last year started with Stone firing the puck in from the point.
That's a great point. Well done.
Thank you. I really just do this podcast because I seek your approval, and I get it once every 2 to 3 weeks.
Last and certainly not least on our list here, the World Junior Development Camps. Now, these were staged last week. And it is exactly what it sounds like. It's a camp where these countries that participate in the World Junior Championship, they bring in X number of players that they're considering for that team, and then they gradually, through this camp and throughout the performances of the early next season, if that makes sense, they'll come with their final rosters. But this was the starting point. A bunch of the Coyotes prospects involved, no big surprises. Team USA was Clayton Keller and Christian Fisher. Team Canada, Dylan Strome, Jacob Chychrun, Nick Merkley, and then I'll leave you to talk about Sweden's player.
Because we can't figure out how to pronounce his name, so you're going to toss it on me. I believe it's Jens Luke, which would be another Luke. We're going to have a lot of Lukes here at some point, but this one's spelled differently. Yeah, I actually got to see him play more than the other guys just because of when I was able to watch the games.
He had a couple goals in the first game,
yeah.
I believe, against Team Canada.
Yeah, that was one of the main games I saw. He looked really good out there.
Looked really good?
He looked really good. I have to roll the letter correctly. But, Keller and Fisher on Team USA, probably not guys we're going to see this year, but two players I'm very excited about for different reasons, very different style of players. And we saw them both actually at the rookie game earlier this summer. I thought Keller stole the show in that game. Chychrun, as you pointed out, was very noticeable as well, but Keller was just dancing around everybody, and at the time he was 17. So he's going off to college. Excellent, speedy young player, and then Fisher's almost the complete opposite. He can just run you over and then put the puck in the net after everybody's laying on the ice. I like having that versatility.
I highly doubt Dylan Strome will be playing for Team Canada at the World Junior. He went to the camp.
You have to, just in case.
I think he's going to be busy as I look at the schedule. Just my gut feeling. There's no inside info here, but I think he's going to be busy with a nice long homestand here for the Coyotes.
Yeah, he may have other more pressing work at that time, but that's it's a good situation to be in for both him and the Arizona Coyotes. You are drawing a picture, and I can't read it. Either way, thanks for listening to the Coyotes Corner podcast. For Dave Vest and for thanks to executive producer Doug Cannon, I'm Luke Lapinski. Again, thanks for listening. We'll be back in a couple weeks.